Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, nerdlings of all ages, welcome to a new Hearthstone deck guide from the Whispers of the Old Gods expansion. I'm JoRoSaR, and I'm here to take you through a very interesting deck indeed. In today's video, we're going to be discussing a class that's caused a lot of trouble and definitely a lot of table flipping before Whispers of the Old God was released. And as you can see behind me, it is, of course, Druid. Now, once upon a time, Malfurion was considered one of, if not the strongest deck in the game, and you could ramp out strong minions early on through Innovate and Wild Growth, and then basically kill your opponents with half their hit points with an absolutely brutal combo. Now with Old Gods out though, the classic set changed and the standard rotation is in effect and things are looking quite different for Druid. So before we get to their new top deck, let's take a look a little bit at how Druid actually suffered quite a lot in the run-up to Whispers of the Old Gods. Now, a couple of days before Old Gods came out, of course, the nerfs popped by and Druid got hit very, very hard. It was one of the most heavily damaged classes, in fact, probably the most heavily damaged class by the recently announced classic set. These three staple cards that you see on top of me, Keeper of the Grove, Force of Nature, and Ancient of Lore, really got hit hard, and there were actually a lot of other cards that Druids typically use in their decks that disappeared as well. Shade of Naxxramas, gone. Piloted Shredder, gone. And who can forget Dr. Boom? So in addition to this, we have a situation where we have their best removal effect in Keeper of the Grove, nerfed. We have their best card refilling mechanic, Ancient of Lore, nerfed. And we also have Force of Nature no longer charging, meaning that you can't threaten instant lethal even when you're behind on the board, which was kind of the point of a lot of decks that made Druid so powerful earlier on. But now, all of this has changed. Even though Druid doesn't have any of these cards anymore, it does have something else that might actually keep them in contention, and this is what I want to share with you today. It is, of course, C'Thun. Now, C'Thun was the first revealed Old God from the Whispers expansion, and it's designed in such a way to help novice deck builders create a deck from scratch. C'Thun is a 6-drop at the moment for 10 mana, so it's 6/6 to begin with, that grows when you play his entourage, and he deals heaps of damage on arrival. And in longer games as well, what you tend to find is that you get your C'Thun's buff to like 16/16 or even greater, which means Druids basically kind of have a Force of Nature Savage Roar alternative. I mean, it's not quite the same, but it's certainly really, really powerful. And the way you grow your C'Thun threat is by playing cultists that buff his stats wherever he happens to be, in your hand or in your deck. And there are C'Thun synergetic minions on almost every mid-game turn for Druid, which is why you can get a reliable and stable curve, and is one of the reasons why a deck like this can actually work. So most of C'Thun's cultists are actually neutral, but there are some class-specific ones as well. And furthermore, not all cultists actually buff C'Thun directly. Some just have a favorable effect when C'Thun is at a certain power level. We'll go through a couple of those cards in a second. But here are all the cultists that are basically available to you. And as you can see, there's more than enough options. And later in the video as well, I'll go over some of the best ones to help you build a solid list that performs consistently for you in your ranked games. Now, C'Thun Druid keeps the same sort of mid-range play a minion a turn kind of style that Druid is known for, but it replaces a lot of the old staples. So you'll be looking at cards like Living Roots, for example. You've got Druid of the Claw, Keeper of the Grove, and Piloted Shredder, and you're just ramming lots and lots of cultists into the deck to make sure you can play them out on curve. The goal is to build a sturdy board and take the initiative in your game. And once you do that, you get him to go on the offensive, of course, and deal enough damage so that as soon as you trigger C'Thun, it can end up being lethal or very close to lethal. So let's take a look at some of what we would consider the best cards. So as I just mentioned, having a fluent curve is absolutely paramount to this build, but luckily there's loads of cultists that get that job done. And between Beckoner of Evil and Dark Arakoa, for instance, this list can play a C'Thun buffer on every single turn from 2 to 6. You can kind of see it above me on top and to my right here. And this is just really, really powerful and ensures that in most of your games, actually, C'Thun will comfortably get to 16/16, if not more. And C'Thun buffers aren't the only threat in this deck either. Now, Druids received some really powerful new cards with Whispers, and two of the most prominent are Maya Keeper and Claxi Amber Weaver, which you can see here. The Maya Keeper is among the best Druid cards ever released, really. It's a 3/3 body for 4 mana, fine, that can either cast Wild Growth, ooh, hello, and speed up your mana cycle and get you close to turn 10, or it can spawn a 2/2 body for extra board presence. It's just very, very good. And Claxi Amber Weaver as well, it's basically a 4/10 for 4 mana 100% of the time, knowing how buffed your C'Thun is, obviously, and unlike cards such as, like Twilight Drake, it's not quite as vulnerable to silence effects. At the end of the day, it's still a 4/5. That said though, possibly C'Thun's strongest synergistic minion is Twin Emperor Veclor. It spawns 2 4/6 bodies for 7 mana with Taunt, and that's the kind of wall that's basically impassable against decks that don't have easy ways to power through. So examples of ways that maybe someone could do this is Equality if you're facing a Paladin, maybe Twisting Nether if you're playing against a Warlock, you'll need some Black Knight kind of combos there. But otherwise, it's just so difficult to get through. And it can also end up meaning that Twin Emperor can be the difference between living or dying if you're up against a really aggressive build like Zoo. And that obviously is the kind of deck that Druids tend to fear a little bit, because those aggro decks can actually score quite heavily against Druid if you're not careful. So at most, your C'Thun synergies and their battle cry effects just buff up C'Thun really, really well, and the deck also implements Bran Bronzebeard, and oh my god, there are some seriously sick combinations that can actually come out here with Bran. So the easier ones to execute are things like Bran and Disciple of C'Thun, because you get to deal 4 damage and you get a +4/+4, cha-ching. Bran plus Claxi, for example, gives you a 4/15, hello, and then later on, you can do some absolutely crazy stuff. Bran plus Emperor for 4/4/6 Taunt, yes please! And Bran plus Dark Arakoa gives +6/+6 to your C'Thun as well. All sorts of unbelievable combinations are possible with Bran, so be very careful when you play Bran, and when you think you might have the opportunity, you do not want Bran to get removed on the same turn, so ideally you can use him with multiple combinations if you have them in hand. So that's kind of a basic overview of why C'Thun Druid is actually playable. There are plenty of reasons to play it, and it's really easy to pilot. I think that's one of the first things I have to say. Once you take a look at the cards and you go, oh, that's what these cards are for, they don't really change that much during the course of the game. It's actually quite easy to pick up and enjoy and play. It's even easier to play, I'd argue, than the old combo Druid, to be perfectly honest, and that's what's really great for novice players. Most turns will feature 1 or 2 valuable plays, and you just go for them. You're not really spending all of your turn working out what those are. And there are a lot of minions that provide just straight up value in this deck. So if you think about classes like Priest or Mage, where you kind of have to wait and combine several cards to get maximum value, this list's punching power, it's all in the minions, folks. You've got C'Thun's Chosen, you've got Amber Weaver, you've got Azure Drake, Dark Arakoa, for example, and Twin Emperor. These are all examples of cards where your only investment is your mana on that turn, and they can end up being pretty scary on their own. There's also enough removal to help you stay alive. You've got double Wrath, double Swipe, and Disciple of C'Thun, which is a great early game swing card, especially against classes that can't ping it off with their hero power. But the main disadvantage, because there are pros as well as cons to this deck, is the lack of card draw. Old Druids used to run double Ancient of Lore on top of Azure Drakes, and since the nerf, Ancient of Lore isn't really a reliable minion anymore. So Azure Drake ends up kind of being the only hand-refilling card in the deck, excluding Wrath. And the lack of card draw leads to the other flaw. You get unreliable C'Thun draw. So builds before the nerf, just bear with me for a second, they included 2 copies of Force of Nature and Savage Roar, so you wouldn't really worry about finding a copy of the combo, right? But C'Thun can only be 1. It's legendary. So as a result, the deck relies even more heavily on building a scary board. So if your board effectively gets cleared, like Wild, Pyromancer, Equality kind of combos and things like that, it does put the player in a position where you need a huge C'Thun draw to drop and finish to try and stop your opponent from swinging. if you get really good removal against you, it can be a problem unless you draw it. So this is similar in nature perhaps to some of the old Reno decks where you go, oh, I sure hope I get Reno in my starting hand or I draw him at the right time, because if he's on the bottom of my deck and I'm playing aggro, I'm dead. You get a similar situation here when you're dealing with a very powerful mid-game where your board gets cleared. You better hope you've got C'Thun there to rescue you from that kind of thing. So let's go ahead and take a look at a couple of deck lists. So here are example deck lists. You can pause this video and maximize it on your monitor and take a look at some of the useful decks you can build. The list over to my far right, or I guess your left, is the standard list. Now, there are a couple of variations currently being experimented with, and it's really early in the meta, right? So by the time you see this video, it could well be different already, but this is just to give you a bit of an idea. The most standard one features nothing fancy, just all the value minions, and you play them on curve as much as you can. And this is a list you'll often see on ladder, and it just picks up a really good win rate. And especially if you're just slicing through the lower ranks, it's a fantastic option to have, right? Then you've got Cabrix's build. And this replaces a lot of cards in the standard build to include more card draw. So trying to address the problem that Keeper of Law basically doesn't give you anymore post-expansion. So we've got two Loot Hoarders replacing Maya Keeper early in the game, and we are going to put in an Ancient of Law instead of a Twin Emperor, and we've got an Ancient Harbinger too. So even though Ancient of Law is not as good, we just want to get a little bit of card draw in there, and we're actually sacrificing some of our decent cards to get them in the hopes that those multiple card draws end up paying off for us. Druids of the Claw replace the 3/6 Crazed Worshipper as well, so you're sacrificing a bit of C'Thun buffing, but you do get a bit of flexibility in exchange. And this is also a good example of what you might want to do if you lack Bran and Twin Emperor, because these are two cards that this deck doesn't play. Now, in the third deck that you see here, this is Tice's deck, and this is a spin on the standard mode, and it uses the new Druid legendary Fandral Staghelm to get double bonuses from Wrath and a Maya Keeper, as well as the really cheap Raven Idol and Living Roots. So by using those kind of cards, you're hoping to be able to secure your board and remove a couple of minions a little bit easier than you would with the standard deck. And depending on what you happen to be playing against, don't forget the meta's changing really quickly, you might want to be swapping in and out of these decks as well. So I hope, guys, that this has been useful for you. This is just a really quick top-line overview to what C'Thun Druid actually looks like. Shout out to GosuGamers Hearthstone. You can go ahead and subscribe to the YouTube channel. Of course, GosuGamers Hearthstone, if you just need to be searching for it and you're seeing this elsewhere. And you get to find tournament VODs and podcasts and more guides like this one as well. And make sure you check out our Hearthstone podcast, The Innovated, every Monday at 9 o'clock CEST for more in-depth Hearthstone talk. The podcast is available on the YouTube channel as well as iTunes, so you can go ahead and follow or download there too if that's what you're fancying. And then finally, you can follow us on Twitter at GosuGamersHS, as well as myself at JoRoSaR. I hope you've enjoyed. Make sure you go ahead and give us as much feedback as you can. And go check out GosuGamersHS on Facebook as well to be up to date with everything from the Hearthstone scene. I'm JoRoSaR, guys, and until next time, enjoy laddering. Take care.